Welcome to Ask Psych Sessions, where we ask some of the best teachers in psychology questions from you, our audience. If you would like to send in a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions, all lowercase, no spaces. And here's our next question. I am with Jason Eggerman from Spokane Community College on the other side of Washington State. Jason, how are you doing over there on the east side?
We're doing all right. How are you doing, Garth?
Well, it's been an interesting day. It's been an interesting couple weeks, actually. Our college shut down face-to-face classes, mostly, I think, and has just today extended spring break for us in 2 weeks so that we can prep to go completely online in spring quarter, which is crazy. I mean, not so crazy for us. I think, like, in psychology, social sciences, humanities, like, this kind of works. I don't know I almost said STEM, but some psychology departments are in STEM. But I don't know what this chemistry is doing or physics with their labs. So it's a crazy time for people.
Yeah. I mean, I know we have a fully online chemistry class. I don't exactly know how they pull it off, but I do know that they have at least one offering at our institution that is a fully online lab science and chemistry. So it can be done,
Right.
But I don't know if it can be done in a week.
I'm sure people are talking about how it can be done and how it can be done in a week. But, Jason, this is what instructors are dealing with in Washington State and beyond, is some of them not having ever taught online are now being forced. And I think it's good for their students' sake, right, so they can finish the term out with their students and, finish the exams, the assessments, and which we'll talk about in a minute. And really just finish the courses. But how to do it, that is the question. And maybe let me just ask you real quick before we get going to the question I am going to ask you about. You do a lot of online teaching. You listen to a lot of conversations. You're on Twitter. You are giving talks about this stuff. Talk to me a little bit about if an instructor has never taught online before and they are thrown into this, what are they thinking? What do you think?
I mean, I guess I would start with saying, and this is one of the big conversations that I've been watching on Twitter, is a lot of people are drawing the distinction between, there's a big difference between we're going to do as best we can to salvage the semester or salvage the quarter in an online fashion and use online tools to get through the end of the semester as best we can. That's not necessarily the same thing as designing an online course that is intended to be fully online and was thought through as fully online. So with that distinction in mind, I think faculty who are being thrown into this at this point are probably freaking out and panicking. Yeah. I imagine if I had never taught online and I had a week to get ready to teach online, I would be pretty worried as well. But one of the things I've seen a lot of people talking about on Twitter as well, and I think this is one of the first places that my mind would go. I'd honestly be more worried about my students than I would be about my workload.
It's interesting, Jason. I was going to ask you about students, and then you took it out of my mouth. But the reason I was going to ask you about it is because when I talk to you about online teaching, you often bring it back to your students' experience. I know you think about that. So real quick, before we get into exams and assessment, because that's what I want to talk to you about, why is it important for all instructors, but for those who are now going to have to salvage the term online, why is it important for them to think about their students in an online course?
Well, because it might be a completely new experience for the student as well. There's at least with my students, when I have students in a face-to-face class, they deliberately chose to take a face-to-face class because they don't want to take an online class. So for us to suddenly throw all the students into an online format, that's anxiety provoking to many of them. Not all of them. Some of them I'm sure are thrilled. Um, but it's anxiety provoking for many of them as well, not just for the faculty.
Right. Yeah, and I've heard you talk about access and not assuming access for that students would have internet access, for
Yeah,
example, or
yeah,
device access or whatever.
yeah. I think a lot of the time, some of your most, decision like this to go fully online can potentially have the greatest impact on some of your most vulnerable students. Um, you're at a community college like me. You could even take it to the place that some of our students are probably homeless. They don't necessarily have a laptop. They don't have a Wi-Fi connection. The only time they get online is at campus. So expecting that somebody can just go home and finish on their computer is not necessarily an accurate perception to assume that everybody has a computer at home and an internet connection at home or an environment at home. They may have kids running around, and it's going to be very difficult for them to focus at home. And that time in the classroom in a face-to-face environment is almost like a sanctuary of learning for them. So
You know
it's
what? I my Seattle Public Schools just shut things down for the
mhm,
next 2 weeks as of tomorrow, and I think the most important thing that you will probably say in this little Q&A that we're doing is that last minute, so people can kind of rewind if they weren't listening and go back and listen, because we as faculty need to assume that this is not ideal for students, especially
exactly.
our most vulnerable students. Kids running around the house while you're trying to take a final exam. Just imagine if
Yeah.
you didn't sign up for that. That's quite a shock. Hey, Jason, I want to get into exams and assessment because I have really enjoyed some of the um, I guess the talks that you've given on exams and talking with you about exams. And I know you have some thoughts about online exams and assessments. So I'm just going to let you take that wherever you want to go. What would you say to a new online instructor? Some hints, tips, tricks, whatever about online exams and assessments.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's pretty typical for instructors, in at least my experience has been in most college and university courses, to give some sort of exam or assessment. Um, we would be here all day if we were going to have a broader assessment conversation. And the name that always comes to mind when I think of those sorts of conversations would be the wonderful and talented Missy Beers at the Ohio State University. I've learned a lot from her about backwards design, and rather than starting with the content and then designing your exam, you should sort of start with your outcomes, and what do I want to accomplish, what do I want to assess, and tailor your assessment to your outcomes. Assuming that we're already doing that in an online fashion or in a face-to-face fashion, the second question that you can ask yourself is, do I need exams in the first place? I know that you're friends with Sue Franz and you're friends with Rachel Seucher, and I think both of them have kind of moved away from traditional multiple choice type exams, and they do more um, creative types of longer lasting assignments where the students are answering questions over the courses of several days, where they have to work with the content and apply it. And I think you can probably get your assessment in that way just as well. So all of that being said, right, if you do intend to use multiple choice or true false, or kind of a more traditional type of exam, um, there are a few things that I would think about or consider, at least that I have found helpful in an online format. Um, if teaching online is brand new to you, one of the first things that I would suggest is reaching out to your instructional designers if you're fortunate enough to have those. Hopefully they can help you with the very basic nuts and bolts of how do I create an assessment, because typically, at least in Canvas or in Blackboard, you're going to have 20 million different settings that you can click on and you can adjust, and you might not be familiar with all those, right? um, the other thing I would suggest is making sure you understand that there's a difference between delivering an exam in an online format and doing an online class, right? So if you've just been asked um, to give one exam online to sort of save the end of a semester, that's different than structuring structuring exams that are embedded in a class that's 100% online from the very beginning of the semester.
Yeah, why is that, Jason? Why is that different?
Well, I think so. For just as an example, if you're used to teaching a traditional face-to-face class that say meets for an hour, you might have an exam that is designed to be completed in an hour. And if you try to just simply upload those questions into a quiz on the LMS, you might be tempted to think to yourself, oh, well, I give this exam in an hour. That's what my face-to-face classes get. So I'm going to set the timer, to be done done for an hour. Typically speaking, my experience with online classes has been that exams are oftentimes open for multiple days, because students who are taking an online class and know that it's an online class from the very beginning, you don't have a set synchronous meeting time, right? It's not as if everybody's logging on at exactly 10:30 and we're all synchronously having class together. It's an asynchronous environment most of the time. So typically speaking, what I have found works really well with exams, and it might be counterintuitive if you're used to a traditional face-to-face class where, everybody takes the exam at the same time, is, the exams are set up where you have 3 or 4 days to decide when is it best for you to get it done, or even 2 or 3 days to decide when is it best for you to get it done. That can be a shift in thinking about, when to do an exam like that.
Right. So I just moved an exam. I had to take my research methods class and finish off the term online. And so what you're speaking about really resonates with me, because I did have to think about, now I teach online in other courses. I just have never taught this class online. And I take all my courses very seriously that I teach, but this particular class I love this class and I love my students and I really want them to be successful when they go on to do a psychology degree at the University of Washington. So I take it really seriously, and I have this beautiful comprehensive final that they're supposed to take face to face. And now I had to decide, like, how do I move this online? I had to run through all those questions that you are talking about, particularly in terms of like access. Their lives are going to be complicated by what we're dealing with. And so I decided to just give it an end date. It's just open now, and I gave it an end date for the end of the quarter. And that's what I decided to do, and that's very different than giving an exam in class face to face.
Yeah, I think one of the things I found with teaching online that sometimes becomes a struggle, or you have to just sort of learn to adjust to it, is learning to trust our students a little bit more. Oftentimes the biggest concerns about exams are, first and foremost, cheating and the integrity of the questions, right? I want to make sure that the student gets the grade that they earn and that they're doing their own work. Well, in a face-to-face environment, typically speaking, you're going to have more ability to kind of monitor that situation. Granted, there are software options out there where you can, and I don't use any of these, and I would never necessarily advocate for any of these because I'm not a fan. But, there are software options out there where you can, I don't even remember the name of them, but where you can make it where the student has to, lock down their browser. I think it's called like lockdown browser.
Yeah.
And even you can have exams where like the student has to have their webcam turned on the whole time, so they're being recorded. And their screen is being recorded. And I don't know, to me, I'm just not a fan of those types of what seem to me to be sort of drastic measures.
Well, think about kicking up your students' anxiety too, being
Right.
recorded while they're taking an exam. My goodness.
Right.
Not to mention the nightmare on the faculty side. I had a faculty colleague who once did that, and it was not a great experience from that side either. So
yeah, so I just think that there are, other ways to, if you want to still give exams, they don't necessarily have to be the only thing that you give in a course, right? You can still have other ways of assessing learning. I think that, rotating the questions you use can be helpful. That even, if you think about, I know you're involved with the Intro Psych Initiative, I've even toyed with the idea of rotating topics quarter to quarter within particular pillars.
interesting.
So maybe every fall quarter I'm going to cover sensation perception, but every winter quarter I'm not. I'm going to rotate that topic out and rotate in, a different topic from that pillar.
Right.
I think that at least cuts down on the chances that students are passing questions on from fall to winter or winter to spring if you're on a quarter system, or from fall to spring if you're on a semester system. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
So it's a major consideration, not only how you format your exam and the access to it, but also the validity of your exam, to make sure that you are setting it up in such a way that you are actually assessing student learning and not your student's ability to copy someone else. And so you do have to think through these kind of creative ways that you're going to structure things, it sounds like.
yeah, well, and you have to factor in. I mean, one of the things I found too that you have to factor in is oftentimes like the lag time of, if you're are you going to set your exam up, for example, where it goes one question at a time. So you answer question number one and you click next, and then you have to wait for question two to load, and then you click next and you have to wait for question three to load. Well, that's nothing like an in-person exam.
Right.
The students can look at all the questions at once on a paper copy, and they can bounce around, and there's no lag time necessarily other than them flipping the pages back and forth. So that was something I had to learn early on with this. Is it's at first when I started doing this, I was all about like, well, if the in class students get 50 minutes for 45 questions, then the online students get 50 minutes for 45 questions.
Yeah.
But when they're clicking around one question at a time, even if it's only taken 3 or 4 seconds in between each question to load, that adds up. And I started listening to my students, and I thought, well, yeah, you guys have a pretty valid concern here. So you have to think about, do I want it to load one question at a time? Do I want to have it list all the questions at once so they can just kind of scroll up and down? Do I want to use a time limit? Do I want to give a certain number of days? There's just a lot of things to consider before
Right.
you finalize the settings.
And so the way that you consider this is, now there's all these options that people are going to run into. You
Mm-hmm.
obviously have done it a certain way. I hear you not being prescriptive. And I think that's a great thing. You want people to think about their students, to think about the goals of their assessment and exams, and then to make kind decisions based on those things that kind of serves everybody well. Is that
Yeah,
kind of a good
yeah.
summary?
Well, and that's the same exact thing I would say about a face-to-face class. Is I don't think there's a prescriptive magic bullet for how to do things in a face-to-face class either. You need to know who your students are. You need to know what your goals are, and then make informed expert decisions from there on how you want to pull things off.
So, Jason, we are almost out of time, but I wonder if there's any other exam tips or tricks or hints or hacks that you want to share with us before we end this.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably two other real quick basic things would be that take the time to Google some of your questions every now and then, search the internet and see if they're out there. And oftentimes, because odds are they will be if you give online assessments often enough. And one of the quick fixes around that I've usually run into is I'll just modify the question very slightly. So if it's a intro psych question about the parietal lobe and somatosensation, and it was about holding a snowball, I'll just change the question. So now it's about like, holding a kitten instead, and feeling that the kitten is fluffy. At least now it's the same general question, but now I know if someone tries to Google the old question, they're not going to be able to find it because I just
Right.
changed the example, and it took me 2 seconds. And then the last and most important thing I would say is probably, once you've designed your test, it's super important that you actually like preview it. And I when I design a test, I actually preview it and actually take it and go through it to make sure that I've marked the answers that are supposed to be the right answers as the right answers, because oftentimes I'll find out that I made a mistake, and then that saves you a lot of headache in the future.
Well, Jason, thank you for sitting down with me and having this conversation. I really do appreciate your time, and enjoy that spring break, and we'll see if it extends.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Bye bye.